Vally, a couple of things he said. We're looking now to the longer term and in anticipation of the colder months where the demand is going to be high. Some of the things that he talked about was around, obviously around maintenance and so on. He spent quite a bit of time making the analogy between a motor plan and some of the, the manufacturing equipment or the equipment that they do have, making sure that those supply contractual agreements are in place to make sure they get spare parts and everything they need to fix what needs to be fixed. Then he talked about the water use licenses. He also talked about the one-stop shop gas-to-power projects, and then came to how we can bring on a number of different players in the market to provide extra energy and capacity. And maybe that's where we pick up on, is who are some of these additional players that are meant to be able to do so quite quickly and efficiently.
Good morning, Imam, and a very good morning to your viewers as well. And once again, thank you for inviting me back. Yeah, I think the Minister has said a lot, and so at a very high level, just to before I just unpack what you've just asked me, what he said in a nutshell is that in the attempt to stop load shedding, which is a priority for the country, they are focusing on two main aspects. In other words, to fix Eskom generation, and there he said it's still at a risk because the EAF is still quite high vis-a-vis the UCLF and the PCLF and the partial load losses, all of that. So with that, I'm saying the grid is still at a risk. And on the other end, he said that they're putting a lot of time and effort into accelerating new electrons onto the grid. And then he said, we've got to treat Eskom and these new initiatives as a complete aggregation. Now, one of the key aspects, and just to get to your question, is how do they facilitate these new electrons? So there's a number of initiatives. One of the main vehicles is the creation of the National Transmission Company of South Africa. And that brings in a lot of benefits. The key aspect is the non-discriminatory access to the grid for IPPs, including Eskom, including the municipalities as utilities, I would argue even prosumers. But just on that aspect, and we can talk about it a bit later, the municipalities are still challenged to take full advantage of that capability, and also bearing in mind that the National Transmission Company is an arm of Eskom, and Munich operates separately. But I think from the IPP perspective, the Minister has talked a lot about debottlenecking, some of the blockages, and he talked about procurement, procurement, and then looking at the OEMs, especially on the turbines center line. I know they had problems with Rotec, and then on the EIAs, the water use licenses, and all of the other projects. So basically, it's looking at IPPs, prosumers, of course, Eskom generation again, looking at municipalities to come on the grid, and of course, there's other opportunities through the new ERA that's being done.
Vally, maybe we just quickly then go into maybe one or two other aspects. I was saying, often it's just this operational response, emergency responses to the lack of energy provision, the escalation of load shedding. When you listen to what the Minister has now said, in terms of bringing in other players, but also having a more long-term view for the return to stability, and in fact, in some reality in the future, where he's saying the competition should result in decreasing in electricity prices. I mean, when last did we ever hear of something like that? Or the stability by bringing in other players. What would you like to share with the country then on his objectives and some of the progress he's made in making that picture a reality?
Thanks, Imam, for that question. I think it's an excellent question. I think the ministers and the other stakeholders, Eskom, are trying their best to try and alleviate the situation. But if I can just respond in the interest of time, the single major constraint is that Eskom still does not have sufficient headroom to initiate or action, for example, all of these major maintenance stuff. In other words, they need what we call a reasonable amount of reserve margin, so that when you have these bumps, etc., on the grid, the customer won't see it. You're able to accommodate that. Eskom doesn't have that now. Generally, you would have 10 to 15%, let's call it additional capacity or reserve margin. Eskom doesn't have that now. In fact, some cases we go into a minus situation. So that's why the minister is saying they focus a lot on planned maintenance, right? So that it gives them the opportunity to try and decrease the amount of UCLF. But to do the planned maintenance effectively, you needed that reserve margin. So all of these good initiatives that the minister is talking about is noble, is great, but until we get to a sufficient or reasonable headroom, right,
which is that precious reserve,
we are at a risk, and I'm so concerned, talking as a professional and as an experienced generation engineer, that we're going into a cold season, we're going into a winter season. That risk, because the demand will obviously increase, we have an erratic and unstable grid, we may get increased levels of load shedding. That's reality, right?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I'm quickly sighing is, so when he talks about things like the one-stop shop, this is to bring in, new players, these are some of the independent power producers and so on, get rid of all of the red tape, increase that growth capacity, and then exploring other issues, whether it's gas to power or whatever the case may be. In terms of the timing coinciding with when you say this demand is going to be as it is every single year, and probably more so this year because more people have access and more people will be using power. Are we heading over, I don't want to use the word heading over a cliff because that's so alarmist, but are we heading, towards another precipice come May?
No, I don't think. I think with the initiatives and efforts that they're putting in, we wouldn't get to that cliff, I don't believe. But we will still have load shedding. And then, given the erratic nature of the grid, and in South Africa, unlike other countries, we have what we call big packs. If you look at a typical power station, we call it a six-pack power station. It's 6 by 600 megawatts.
We can relate to the analogy.
and now we've got Medupi and Kusile 6 by 800 packs.
Yeah.
And so when one of them goes off the grid, we have a major challenge on the grid. So that's the other challenge, is that when the demand increases and when the grid is unstable, you stand the risk of having these breakdowns. And when you have these breakdowns, then obviously your load shedding stage may increase. But I think with the efforts that are being put into place, hopefully the level of load shedding stage will be lower. I still believe we'll still be operating at about stage 2, stage 3, and that could be for a couple of years.
Wow, okay. So, and again, experientially, we think over the last couple of days or so where it seems as if we've had less load shedding. What's your sense overall on how the situation has improved?
Well, at the moment, arguably, we've got 2 long weekends. We had this week that passed, and then so a number of the commercials and factories are, I would say, closed. And also, generally, demand has dropped because people have gone off the grid to a certain extent, and we're still not that in a cold season. But when we get now in the next couple of weeks, when we really get into the cold season, then you ask me for my outlook, then that's when the risk is of maybe increased levels of load shedding, because all the efforts that the minister is talking about will not happen overnight. These will take time, because that's the nature of the beast. It takes longer time, and that's when the creation of the one-stop shop is hopefully going to try and ratchet up and increase or accelerate the debottlenecking of some of the challenges.
Yeah, one analogy you have in mind is almost bailing water in a vessel that has sprung multiple leaks. And as we head to a colder season where demand is going to increase, compromising that EAF or that energy availability factor, as you say, in a context where we don't necessarily have those reserve margins to be able to buffer us and cushion us. What is going to be the state of, as you say, a lot of these haven't come on stream yet, the National Transmission Company of South Africa and other initiatives, demand is going to spike. How do you see all of these factors working together at a time of high demand?
Well, maybe just to give a bit of comfort, well, maybe it's the wrong word, is that when you load shed, and I'm repeating this, what I've said over the last couple of years, it's still one of the best management tools to prevent us from going into a blackout and collapse of the grid. So we don't want to get there. I mean, that's atrocious, if I can call it. So what we still need to do, and we're doing it, and if I use my NRS chairmanship at here, we've created tools, standards, and codes of practice to assist the system operator and national control as best as we can, not to get into a blackout situation or a collapse of the grid. I mean, we must not forget that Eskom, for the last 100 years, has not had a single national blackout. Ironically, that's a significant achievement, because in countries, and these are first world countries that had blackouts, it was significant chaos in the country. And also bear in mind that system operator national control does not only use load shedding to mitigate the collapse of the grid. They've got a number of other tools for that. And also, Imam, also repeating what I've just said, when you get to high stages of load shedding, it does not mean you are closer to a blackout. It's just that we, technically and professionally, the system operator and the Munich control rooms are applying technically accepted standards which have been operating for many, many years to protect the grid. And the other comfort I've always said, there's about 850 good, excellent people in the operations arena in Eskom and the municipalities that will prevent us from collapsing the grid. So I think I want to give that comfort from an NRS perspective. And so I don't believe we'll get into a blackout collapse of the grid situation, but we'll definitely get load shedding, and hopefully the levels of load shedding will be at a lower level given the efforts that's being put by the ministry and Eskom. And of course, the Eskom generation team, I can tell you, are doing their level best in trying to address this, but until they get that headroom sorted out, they're going to be dancing.
Vally Padayachee, thank you very much for sharing with us today. Just not only kind of summing up what the Minister has said in terms of those management strategies to kind of, muscle out or muscularize Eskom, the introduction of the National Transmission Company, some of the work that they will be doing, approved as a buyer for some of the legacy projects. So that's one arm there, looking at bringing in more, diverse portfolio of players in energy provision and so on. Thank you for just helping us understand that a little bit better. And as Vally Padayachee is saying, the possibility of getting into that black start or complete shutdown of the grid situation doesn't seem to be an imminent threat for South Africa, particularly at this point, given some of the interventions and the management plans that have been talked about by the Minister over the last couple of weeks.